So students, today we discuss about the osteology of mandible. As you see, this is the mandible. It is the second largest bone of the face and its greater part ossify in the membrane. It is the second bone to ossify in the body. First bone which ossify in the body is the clavicle. This is the second bone next to the clavicle. As you see, this have two parts. One is the body, this is the body, this complete, and these are the two ramuses. This is one ramus and this is the another ramus. First we discuss about the body. Body is having two surfaces. One is, this is the outer surface and this is the inner surface of the body, and two borders. One is the upper border having the teeth, also known as the alveolar border, and other one is the lower border, which is also known as the base of the mandible. And on the outer surface, if we discuss about the surface, outer surface presents in the midline is a symphysis menti. So this is symphysis menti, a median faint ridge. Okay, and this is indicates the fusion of the two half of the mandible in the midline. And another elevation is this is the elevation known as the mental protuberance. It's the triangular projecting area. Okay, then we will see the mental. This foramen on the outer surface is a mental foramen, and through which mental nerve and vessels will come out, passing upward and backward. Okay, then we will see the oblique line here. As you see here, this is the oblique line on which there is the attachment of buccinator muscle. Okay, then on the inner surface, this is the inner surface, we will see the mylohyoid line. This line is the mylohyoid line, a prominent oblique ridge running obliquely downward and forward. Below this is the third molar, below the third molar. Okay, and this line gives the origin of the mylohyoid muscle. Superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx arises above the posterior end of, this is the posterior end of mylohyoid line. Here is the origin of the superior constrictor muscle of pharynx. It arises above the posterior end of the mylohyoid line. The lingual nerve, it is a very important nerve. Here is the superior constrictor and here is the mylohyoid muscle, and between these two is the lingual nerve is related. Here in between these two, just behind the third molar, lingual nerve is related with the mandible, between the origin of superior constrictor and the mylohyoid muscle behind the posterior end of the mylohyoid line. One raphe immediately behind the third molar here. Immediately behind the third molar, one raphe is attached, pterygomandibular raphe. Pterygomandibular raphe. Below the mylohyoid line, as you see here, is a shallow depression. This shallow depression is known as the submandibular fossa, where in this submandibular fossa, submandibular salivary gland, submandibular lymph node and the facial artery, they will lie. Above the mylohyoid line, this depression is known as the sublingual fossa, where the sublingual salivary gland will lie. So submandibular gland along with the submandibular groups of lymph node and the facial artery will lie just below the mylohyoid line fossa, and one fossa lie above the mylohyoid line. Here is the sublingual fossa where sublingual salivary gland will lie. You will see in the midline on the inner surface these tubercles, two upper and two below. 4 tubercles. Upper genial tubercles and lower genial tubercles. They all are 4 in number. 2 above and 2 below. The above genial tubercles, they will give origin to the attachment of the genioglossus. From genial tubercles to the tongue. Glossus means tongue. Muscle will attach, and from the lower genial tubercles there is a attachment of the geniohyoid, genial tubercle to hyoid bone. So from the upper genial tubercles there is a attachment of origin of the genioglossus muscle, and from the lower one genial tubercles there is a attachment of the geniohyoid muscle. Now we come to the border. Upper border, as you see here, it's known as the alveolar border, where is a sockets are present for the teeth. Okay. Then the lower border, which is also known as the base of the mandible. All over the base of the mandible, this is the base of the mandible. All over the base of the mandible, there is an attachment of the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia and the platysma muscle. Two things attached throughout the base of the mandible. One is the deep cervical fascia of the mandible की investing layer of deep cervical fascia, and second thing which is attached throughout the base of the mandible is the platysma. Okay, and on the lower border we will see 2 fossa. One is here and one is here. These are known as the digastric fossa. In this digastric fossa there is an attachment of anterior belly of the digastric muscle. Anterior belly of digastric muscle is attached. Now we come to the ramus. This is the ramus. Ramus has got, it is the quadrilateral in shape. It has 2 surfaces. One surface is this surface. This is the medial surface. Okay, and this is the lateral surface, and this is the medial surface. Inner one is a medial surface and outer one is a lateral surface. So it has got 2 surfaces. Okay, lateral and medial surface, and it has got 4 borders. This is the upper border. This is the upper border which is notched. Okay, then this is the lower border. Okay, and then the anterior, this is the anterior border and this is the posterior border. Upper border, lower border, anterior border, and this is the posterior border. Lateral surface, as you see here, this is the lateral surface. It is flattened except posterior-superiorly. Posterior-superiorly here is a relation of the parotid gland is related with this, except that one, whole of the lateral surface is covered with the insertion of masseteric muscle. It provides the insertion of masseter muscle, which is a muscle of mastication. Then the medial surface, as you see the medial surface, this is the medial surface. So on the medial surface you will see the one foramen. This foramen is known as the mandibular foramen. Through this mandibular foramen there is the passing of the inferior alveolar nerve and vessels, and this foramen will lead inside is a mandibular canal. Okay, so inferior alveolar nerve and the vessels will pass through the mandibular foramen. Okay, before entering into the mandibular foramen, inferior alveolar nerve gives one nerve known as the nerve to mylohyoid. This nerve to mylohyoid, this is the mandibular foramen, and just above that you will see this triangular elevation. This is known as the tongue shape elevation. This is known as the lingula. So when the inferior alveolar nerve enter into the mandibular foramen, before entering it will give one branch nerve to mylohyoid. This nerve to mylohyoid, first it will pierce this lingula, this tongue shape projection on this there is a attachment of one ligament, sphenomandibular ligament. Sphenomandibular ligament. This ligament comes from the spine of sphenoid bone and it will attach here on the mandible. So the name of the ligament is sphenomandibular ligament. So the nerve 2 mylohyoid pierces this ligament and then enter below the mylohyoid line into this groove. This groove is known as in this groove there is a nerve 2 mylohyoid groove. This groove is nerve 2 mylohyoid groove. In this nerve 2 mylohyoid, nerve will run by piercing the sphenomandibular ligament, which will attach on this lingula, tongue shaped projection. Okay, so in the mandibular foramen or canal, which nerve will pass? Inferior alveolar nerve and vessels. Before entering into this foramen, inferior alveolar nerve gives one nerve, nerve 2 mylohyoid, which will run in this groove, nerve 2 mylohyoid groove. And this nerve 2 mylohyoid will supply this muscle, which is attached on the mylohyoid line, mylohyoid muscle, and also supplying this muscle, which is attached in the digastric fossa, anterior belly of digastric. So nerve 2 mylohyoid will supply mylohyoid muscle and anterior belly of digastric. So this is about the medial surface of this, and on the medial surface here you see a rough impression. Here this is the attachment of, here is the attachment of one muscle known as the medial pterygoid muscle, which is also a muscle of mastication. Okay, and here already told you the nerve is related, the lingual nerve is related. Okay, 4 borders, it has got 4 borders. The upper border is the notched and through which mesenteric nerve and vessels will pass, will cross. Lower border is this is the angle of the mandible. This is angle of mandible. So this lower border is backward continuation of the base of the mandible, and it ends behind at the angle of the mandible. On the angle of the mandible, there is an attachment of one ligament, stylomandibular ligament, which will come from the styloid process to the angle of mandible. And this angle of mandible पर जो ligament attaches, stylomandibular ligament, will separate the parotid gland here from the submandibular gland. Okay, this stylomandibular ligament. Then anterior border, this is a thin border, and posterior border, it is somewhat thicker, and this border is related, this posterior border is related with the parotid gland. So it has got 4 border, upper border which is notched through which mesenteric nerve vessels will pass, anterior border is thin, lower border is the continuation of the base of the mandible and it ends at the angle of mandible, and this angle of mandible पे attachment होता है stylomandibular ligament का, which will come from the styloid process, and this stylomandibular ligament will separate the parotid gland with the submandibular gland, and the posterior border is thick, which is related to the parotid gland. Ramus has also got 2 processes. One process is this conical shape projection, this is known as the coronoid process, and this is the another process which is known as the condylar shape है, condyloid process. It is a strong projection from the posterior superior part of the ramus. The condyloid process, this is the condyloid process, and this is the coronoid process. This is conical projection. This coronoid process पर there is the attachment of the temporalis muscle, and this is the coronoid process, condyloid process. This upper end of the condyloid process is expanded, as you see here. This is known as the head of the mandible, and this will articulate with the temporal bone to form the temporomandibular joint. The lower one part is the constricted. So this part, constricted part of the condyloid process is known as the neck of the mandible, which is covered with the fibrocartilage. Okay, fibrocartilage is attached here. constricted part. Okay, in this part there is a one depression is there. This is known as the pterygoid fovea on both sides. Pterygoid fovea, F-O-V-E-A. In this, lateral pterygoid muscle is attached, inserted. This is also a muscle of mastication. And on the lateral border, there is a neck. On the lateral side of the neck, there is an attachment of the lateral ligament of the temporomandibular joint. So all the four muscles of mastications are attached over the mandible. Masseter here on the lateral surface of the ramus, temporalis on the coronoid process, lateral pterygoid muscle in the pterygoid fovea, medial pterygoid muscle on the rough area on the medial surface of the ramus near the ankle. So all these are the four muscles which are considered as the muscles of mastication. All these four muscles are supplied by the mandibular branch of the fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve, except lateral pterygoid, which is attached here, lateral fovea mein. All the three muscles of mastications, they will elevate the mandible except the lateral pterygoid, and this lateral pterygoid muscle will depress the mandible. Depress means open. So which muscle will help in opening the mouth? Lateral pterygoid. And which muscles of mastications will help in closing the mouth? Medial pterygoid attached here, temporalis attached here, and masseter attached here. Okay, now we come to the age changes. आपसे पूछा जाता है ये mandible किस age का है? This is the mandible of adult size. Why it is known as the adult size? We will see the three things. One is the position of the mandible foramen, one is the angle, and one is the alveolar border. Okay. In children, what happens in case of the children? In case of the children, this mandible foramen will lie in the lower part, near the lower border. Okay. And the angle is obtuse, about 140 degree in case of children. Okay. While in case of the adult, this mandible foramen, it comes in between the alveolar border and the lower border, and angle also becomes 110 to 120 degree. In old age, what happens? The teeth will erupt. Alveolar, जो आपके margins हैं, they absorption हो जाता है, and they will bring the mandible foramen towards the alveolar border या upper border, and angle जो होता है वो again becomes obtuse. Okay, so mandible foramen old age में कहाँ मिलेगा आपको? lower border में. angle कैसा मिलेगा आपको? obtuse मिलेगा. adult में mandible foramen कहाँ मिलेगा? in between these two borders, and angle becomes 110 to 120, also obtuse but 110 to 120. While in case of the children, the angle is 140. And in case of old age, this mandible foramen will lie near the upper border, and these sockets, they becomes absorbed हो जाएगा of the alveolar margin. So mandible foramen will comes to the near the upper border, and angle again becomes obtuse, more obtuse. Next चीज जो आपसे पूछी जाती है, इसमें आप लिगामेंट्स, कौन कौन से लिगामेंट्स मैंडिबल पे अटैच होते हैं? तो लिगामेंट्स अटैच ऑन द मैंडिबल आर 5. Number 1 is the capsule of the temporomandibular joint around the here neck of the mandible. Around the neck of the mandible, this is the neck of the mandible, capsule of the temporomandibular joint. Lateral ligament of the mandible, lateral ligament of the temporomandibular joint attach here, where at the lateral end of the neck of the mandible, near the posterior margin. Third ligament, raphe, here. I told you, near the third molar, pterygomandibular raphe. Then fourth one is here in on the lingula. What ligament? Sphenomandibular ligament. And another ligament is the near the at the angle, stylomandibular ligament. These are the 5 ligaments which are attached to the mandible. Capsular ligament. Then here lateral ligament on the posterior border. Then on here near the third molar, pterygomandibular raphe. Then over the lingula, this is the lingula, there is a sphenomandibular ligament. Then over the angle is the, this is the angle, is the stylomandibular ligament. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन आपसे पूछा जाता है कौन कौन सी नर्व्स रिलेटेड होती हैं मैंडिबल से. तो वन इंपॉर्टेंट नर्व विच इज रिलेटेड just behind the third molar in between the superior constrictor muscle and the posterior end of the mylohyoid line, mylohyoid muscle, lingual nerve, number one nerve. Number two nerves, ये from into the mandibular foramen, inferior alveolar nerve and vessels. The groove for mylohyoid groove, which nerve? Nerve to mylohyoid. तीन nerves हो गए. Then another nerve through the mental foramen. Which nerves will come out? Mental nerve will come out along with the mental vessels. Okay, and also auriculotemporal nerve. Auriculotemporal nerve is related on the medial side of the neck. This is the neck. Okay, तो neck का medial side के relation में रहती है. neck के medial side में auriculotemporal nerve. तो कौन कौन सी nerves हो गई आपके related? neck के neck of the condyloid process के relation में medial side में auriculotemporal nerve, lingual nerve just behind the third molar between the two muscles, superior constrictor and the origin of the mylohyoid and the attachment of the mylohyoid muscle. Then here mandibular foramen में inferior alveolar nerve and vessels. Then groove for the nerve to mylohyoid में nerve to mylohyoid, and from the mental foramen से mental nerve and vessels. So this is about the mandible. Muscles of mastication attach 4 muscles. Here is the masseter, coronoid process पर temporalis. Okay, pterygoid fovea में lateral pterygoid, and on the, near the mandible on the medial side, rough area, medial pterygoid. All these 4 muscles of mastications, they are supplied by mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve. All the muscles except the lateral pterygoid, they will close the mouth, yeah, elevate the mandible, and while the lateral pterygoid will depress the mandible, yeah, open the mouth. Which nerves are related to the mandible? Lingual nerve here, inferior alveolar nerve here, nerve to mylohyoid here, mental nerve and vessels from the mental foramen here, and auriculotemporal nerve medial to the medial side of the neck of the mandible. Ligaments कौन कौन से related होते हैं? Here is the just behind the third molar pterygomandibular raphe. Here lingula पर sphenomandibular ligament, angle of mandible पर stylomandibular ligament. Okay, and near the around the neck, capsule of the temporomandibular joint, and on the lateral side of the neck of the mandible here is the lateral ligament of the temporomandibular joint. So this is about mandible.